Okay, so there's three kinds of resources when you're planning, and the first one is human resources. So within this, you're going to be identifying who your stakeholders are. And even within the stakeholders, you can start to maybe define if there is a necessity to look at primary stakeholders and secondary and interested stakeholders. So there are variables and variations to even the kinds of stakeholders on your project. However, that becomes more complex, and I don't know if your project does require this level of complexity. But just to give you a brush up, a primary stakeholder is or would be people who actually do the walk and are actively involved in the project. And then you have the secondary stakeholders who are the people who might come to certain meetings and play a small part or role, but they aren't necessarily the key decision makers in the project. And then you have the interested stakeholders who are just the people that you might need to keep in loop, but they don't really have any active role within your project, or they don't have any influence on the project tasks. And then basically, once you've defined your primary stakeholders, that will help you understand who are your team members, and then really identifying, even within the team, what are the types of skills and expertise that are required. And then that's when you start to really define the different roles and responsibilities of the team. And so, for example, a role could be literally a project manager, which is the person who will be overseeing the entire project and is also responsible for the project's success. And then you have maybe a project sponsor, which is someone who kind of champions the project and works closely with the project manager. And then there could also be maybe external vendors or suppliers or collaborators who are providing a certain service, or maybe they're literally physically providing you with some equipment or something for your project. So all of these people, if they are actively involved in the project, then yes, they are part of the team members that you can then start to define what role they play within your specific project. And then you're also looking at availability. Um, Say, for example, you have an external collaborator, and this is someone that you're working closely with to provide some sort of an upskilling program for your lodge. Maybe it's someone who is a meditation teacher, and that you're collaborating with them to provide an internal sort of a upskilling training on meditation. So that could possibly look like understanding what is the availability of this meditation teacher, and then chalking out their availability that will then help you sort of create your plan better. And also really looking at what is the time commitment needed from all of the different human resources on the project. So even for yourself, for example, if you're the assigned project manager, how much time do you need to give to this project on a daily basis or a weekly basis? So, also looking at the time commitment will help you understand and align on expectations of the project even before getting started, which is really important. And then you're looking at the material resources, which is literally listing out any physical materials that are required. So, again, this could be equipment, software, hardware. Say, for example, you have an online event. Zoom could even be listed as a software requirement, and maybe a hardware requirement could be the computer with a camera or a mic. And, similarly for a physical event, you could even list venue, which is the space to host the event. That would be a very real requirement, like a physical requirement. And then you have furniture or speakers. So really sort of listing out all of these physical materials that you'll need and even their quantities will help you understand everything that's required to really bring your project into fruition. And then maybe there's things that aren't necessarily readily available that you might need to customize and source. So even listing that within a physical material, that could, yeah, that could also fall under here. And then the last one is financial resources. So again, maybe you do have a budget from your lodge to sponsor this event or this activity that you're planning. But yeah, just making sure that there's clarity on the budget right from the planning stage and the get-go so that there's really no ambiguity around this. And this is even accounting for hidden costs, which could come up, in situations where, let's say, you're inviting a speaker for a physical event, but maybe you're also accounting for um, paying for their travel, right? And so all of that could be a hidden cost, or maybe while they're at the event, it's falling under lunchtime. So even accounting for maybe food costs. So all of these would go under hidden costs that would really need to be accounted for pre um, the event or pre the final outcome. And so accounting or making time to really think about all of these things within the planning stage itself will help you understand even what are these hidden costs that may have been hidden from you previously that you are now aware of. So yeah, so basically those are the three levels of resources and the planning that you'll need to kind of do under this section. And now we're going to move into the next bit, which is time mapping. And this is the third stage of the planning. So really, again, understanding what are your timelines, and this will help you determine the overall project duration, right from the initiation stage to the completion, and even estimating the duration for each of the tasks that you've scoped out in your scoping stage, and also considering for any sort of external factors while you're determining this timelines for each of these things, because it's really important to also look at this realistically. So while you're, determining these durations, estimating the duration of each task and each phase, it's also important to identify the dependencies between tasks and the resources availability. Say, for example, there's a task that's actually dependent on another task. So making sure that there's a realistic timeline for the first task so that even the second or the dependent task is definitely being accurately um, estimated for so that people aren't necessarily having unrealistic expectations, and also accounting for any external factors that might affect timing. So holidays or festivals. And what could also help you estimate is using any sort of historical data from similar projects to inform some of the estimates that you're sort of allocating to each of these tasks or phases of the project. And I feel like you can definitely ask any of the resources who are also assigned to or will be doing some of the tasks, how much time they would take to actually complete the task if you feel like you're having trouble estimating. And that's also a really healthy way to open up the collaboration between you and your team members, is also asking them how much time they would take to complete a task, as opposed to you necessarily, as the project manager, chalking out all of the estimated timelines, which may not actually be completely accurate. Or maybe you have estimated and you can just run them through the timelines that you've set just to kind of get their feedback and understand if it's realistic from their side. And also, I can't stress on this point more, but it also definitely please account for buffer time. And this is really important, especially if there's a non-moving timeline. So say, for example, if you've fixed a particular date for an event. So yeah, you want to have some of the equipment ready. So say, for example, you want to have Zoom ready before the event, and you've put the timeline for Zoom to be downloaded just a day before, but maybe you realize that on like the day before the event, there's something wrong with your computer, and your computer needs to be updated in order to account for Zoom, but then you don't have enough time because your event is planned for the next day. So really making sure that your timelines aren't cutting too close and that you're planning them with a buffer in mind. So maybe I would suggest keeping that timeline to have Zoom on the computer for the event 3 days before the event, or maybe 4 or 5 days before the event. So yeah, a buffer time is really important to just make sure that any unexpected delays or issues can then also not necessarily hamper your final outcome. So that's on timelines, but also timelines ultimately inform major milestones in your project, which are also equivalently important, I would say, because these are basically markers to identify significant events or achievements within the project. And they could also mark the completion of maybe a major domain or section of your project or a task. And really kind of making sure that your milestones are specific will help sort of understand the entire roadmap of your project and also manage stakeholder expectations. Maybe there's someone that you're reporting to for sign-offs, and having clarity on milestones would be easier rather than giving a very micro view of your day-to-day tasks or on the timelines. So yeah, the difference here is really timelines are sort of micro and milestones are the macro of your time mapping. And then you have basically defined the roadmap of your project through the timelines, while your milestones are serving as your guideposts. So you can really see the micro and macro here. And also the milestones are important because they could serve as check-in points to reassess progress and realign if that's what's necessary. So maybe you've completed a large portion of your project, but then understanding that you have completed that as a milestone then gives time for everyone on the project to also reevaluate just the successes or the failures, and understanding if you need to pivot or make any changes. And that could really serve as a good marker for that. And holistically, just time mapping in itself is absolutely crucial to align your team on all of the basically the entire roadmap of your project. And it also helps people understand all of the tasks that are meant to be completed, when they're meant to get done. So this is really aligning people on the milestones and your project's objectives. So that's basically the necessity for this, and it will also really facilitate any sort of resource allocation and scheduling as well. So say, for example, you have a certain task that needs to get done, but then you've accounted for someone's availability and you realize that they're actually on holiday during the time that this task needs to get done. So because you're still allocating it during this mapping stage or the planning stage, you can start to also then maybe push that task to happen a little earlier so that they can complete it before they go on holiday. So all of those identification of potential bottlenecks or delays that could hamper your project will really be seen over here. And then you can also allow for easier progress tracking and reporting just through this time mapping exercise. And there's plenty of project management software that are available free online, like Trello or Asana. And so any of those can be used, but also, I mean, I'll be sharing the Excel sheet, and that can also be used definitely for time mapping as well. Okay, so the last stage in the planning is feasibility. And feasibility is super, super, super important because this will really help you understand whether your project is viable and worth pursuing at all or not. And by really sort of determining the feasibility, you can start to look at ways in which there are different parts of your project that actually need to sort of be accounted for. So, say, for example, you're looking at legal and regulatory. Are there any legal constraints or requirements? Maybe you need to seek a permit or a compliance or follow specific regulations or standards to complete your project. So, again, really understanding what are these other external factors that need to be accounted for when you are sort of planning your project. So this is one section, which is evaluating legal and regulatory feasibility. And then you're looking at schedule feasibility by just, again, going back to the time mapping section, but being super realistic with your timelines and reassessing if the timelines that you've set are viable by the people who are assigned to them. And so, again, considering their availability and if there's any potential constraints over there. So, you're really reevaluating this again over here. And then going back and looking at if there are any environmental risks that need to be evaluated. And this isn't necessarily relevant for all kinds of projects, but I feel like it's super important to assess if there is an environmental impact through your project, and just considering if there's any regulations that you need to keep in mind, or if you have any sort of um, ecological footprint that you might be impacting through this project. And so I would say these are just some domains of evaluation while you're accounting for feasibility, but essentially there are other ways that you can also look at feasibility. But essentially, you're just assessing and almost like conducting sort of a risk assessment based on some of these domains of feasibility. And you can then start to really identify what are potential internal and external risks and evaluating the impact and likelihood of these risks to actually manifest or happen. And what this will help you do is to develop any sort of mitigation strategies to make sure that you're not going to run into some of these issues, or if you need to pivot, that could also be something that could happen at this stage. And essentially, during this stage, you're sort of creating a risk assessment, and I feel like through this risk assessment, you can definitely summarize any sort of areas of potential risk and analyze them and provide clear recommendations whether you need to proceed on this or not, or you can outline the next steps or if there's alternatives needed, or just maybe saying if the project is really not feasible due to this. And that will also give you clarity either way. But essentially, this can then be done in collaboration with the other stakeholders, or you can run this sort of risk assessment through your key stakeholders and really understand and come to a sort of collaborative decision if this project is really worth going ahead with or not, and while you're discussing all of these risks involved. And so thoroughly examining all of these aspects can help you make an informed decision about whether to pursue and move forward with this project, or if you need to modify the scope or just abandon it completely. And ideally, this really helps prevent any wasted resources and really increases the likelihood of your project success, because you're really doing this risk management at such an early stage of the project in itself. So, yeah, that's all for the planning stage. And now we move into the implementation phase of the project. And this is really when your project is at its go time. This is when you as a project manager, or whoever else is assigned as a project manager, will sort of start to see the project, all of their planning work really come alive, and all of the team members that are sort of assigned with tasks will start to roll up their sleeves and start to work on the tasks that have been assigned to them, while the project plan that has been so robustly framed and created will really serve everyone on the project as a guide to help guide through the project as it progresses. So in the implementation, it almost starts with an onboarding, so really making all of the people involved, all of the team members involved, onboarding them onto the project. This is right after, you've gotten the green light for your project to be moved ahead with, and you're into the kickoff. This is the first thing, is really onboarding everyone. And it's super important that there's clarity within this stage of onboarding, because everyone needs to be aligned, maybe onboarding people and taking them through the project statement. That would be a great start, and just focusing on exactly the intention, the purpose, the vision, exactly what's required of this final outcome of the project, and making sure that everyone is clear on their tasks, on the responsibilities that they've been assigned with, and also the timelines. So really alignment here with clarity in the onboarding stage is super key. And then from the project manager's side, it's also important to set up status meetings, to have regular meetings to kind of understand the status of the tasks. And this is where you'll be getting updates on different sort of tasks that are being worked on. And also from your side, you can sort of update the team to say where they are on the project. Are they on track? Are they not on track? And really sort of creating these sort of internal communication mechanisms that will help keep people, everyone in loop, because communication and being transparent is really key here in the implementation phase. So people not walking in isolation, and people having reviews. This is when people will also start to complete their task and get their work reviewed to make sure that it's on track or it's fine. And this is when you'll also start to get you'll start to get your sign-offs, because that's the sort of decision making that happens after a review, that yes, it's approved, it's signed off on, and or some things need to be sourced from a vendor, and making sure that you've gotten the correct approval from the person who's in charge of the budget. They've signed off on it. So again, all of this happens in the implementation phase. And also just like following up and checking in with people to make sure that even after a review, that maybe there's a revision that's required, and checking in to see when they'll be able to submit that or when they'll be able to complete that. So all of this is part of the implementation stage from the project management side. And lastly, it's the handovers. Once tasks have been completed, you can start to check those off and make sure that people have handed over whatever needs to get done, or they've completed it. So all of that is now, coming together in your implementation phase. And I know it can seem like there's a lot of different moving parts to this, and there could be a lot of a lot going on at this stage, which is completely fair. And that's why from the project management side, it's really important to sort of have a tracking mechanism. So that's why I look at this as almost like a separate phase that's individualized to the project manager. But it's having, I guess, like a ensured tracking mechanism in place to make sure that things are going on track as per the project plan that has been created, and the project manager is just monitoring the progress and identifying if there's any deviations from the initial schedule or the initial budget or scope, and just making sure that everyone is in alignment with the delays, or if there's been any sort of shortcomings. And so I see this as a crucial stage just for the project manager, because while the implementation is going on, there is the tracking that's required, and essentially setting up sort of a tracking mechanism will really help to course correct from all of these delays or bottlenecks or unforeseen tasks that may have come up from a task that wasn't accounted for before. Maybe there was a slight deviation from one of the stakeholders that decided to not go a certain way, and or maybe last minute someone had an emergency and they couldn't be available as a resource, and maybe there was a sudden budget creep that came up, which means that essentially the budget that was given or allocated for the project initially was maybe a little too small, and there's some additional hidden costs that have propped up. So really setting up a tracking mechanism from the project manager's side will help course correct and be the glue from all of this, because yes, there can be increasing uncertainties that do develop, but having a clear sort of a tracking strategy in place will help the project manager course correct and just be the glue to everything and hold everything together. So this could look like hosting regular status meetings that have been set up, or maybe just creating tracking systems for yourself. And maybe that could look like reviewing your project management tracking sheet every day or every week, or doing a round of check-ins with your collaborators or resources maybe once a week. Or maybe it's even, setting up calendar reminders for yourself a few days before a handover to check in with the resource to make sure that they're on track. So any sort of tracking systems that you can set up for yourself, for just a regular feedback system or opening a channel of communication with either your team or your key stakeholders. And that is essentially what this stage is of tracking for yourself, and just making sure that everyone's up to date on the project status and that they're keyed in on any delays or bottlenecks right from the get-go. And that's basically what this tracking stage is. And what it can also do is it can help you check to see if your project feels like it's strayed away from the initial intended path, or if it's fallen prey to additional work. And so having this moment to make sure that you're tracking it from your side can really create a moment of reevaluation that will help you decide if there's things that need to be realigned, or if your original plan needs to be shifted. And that's essentially what this is. It's just monitoring through these sort of regular checkpoints that you've sort of established for yourself as a project manager. And then lastly, now we're on the completion stage of the project. And this is the last phase of the project where you're closing up the project, it's completed, you're wrapping up any loose ends, and this is a really great way to celebrate the completion of a project and just honor and acknowledge the project's achievements. And yeah, just also gives people a chance to officially wash their hands off the project, any of the team members that you're working with, and yeah, that's basically the completion stage. So it's divided into two sections. I like to have this as a way of also marking a completion is the evaluation part, which is when you're hosting either a post-mortem or a retrospective conversation around the project. And this is, again, really just evaluating what went well, what didn't go well, what could be better, what could have been done better. And this conversation, I feel, is really important to have with your key stakeholders or with your key collaborators or team members to really understand from their side how they felt the project went. And this is really, really fundamental for growth and to understand what are the areas in which the project could be better next time if someone decides to pursue this again. So really taking away insights and collecting them, and this can also be floated out through a feedback form post the project. Maybe you had or you hosted a live event, and um, and you want to kind of understand from people how they felt the event went, or maybe it was an online event and you can share a post-event feedback form, like a Google form, on email, and really understand from the participant side how they felt the event went, or if it was a workshop. So yeah, this evaluation I feel like is important to understand from other people how you can do better or where are the areas of growth, and just kind of develop and have insight into the project in itself. And then the next part is documentation. So this could be collecting and storing all of the project's necessary information. And this is super helpful because it really helps people to have this sort of a database or bank in which they can always refer back to if they do decide to do a similar project in the future. And yeah, I mean, any sort of cloud based documentation, collaborative documentation space like Dropbox or Google Drive can be used for this. And it's really, again, necessary to have this in place so that, say, for example, you created a really customized version of a project tracking sheet for a project that you did. And maybe there's a similar project that someone else is doing, or maybe you yourself decide to do it again. So just making sure that you have that sheet in itself is going to help you because you've already done the work and you don't need to recreate that sheet from scratch again. So again, this is a super helpful way to also complete the project, and it's a time to celebrate together. Just coming together as a way to evaluate how your project went and close it off with a healthy conversation reflecting about it. So that was my take on the key phases of all of the different parts of a project as per project management. I really hope that with this guideline and with this video that there's some clarity on the different phases and all of the different requirements involved within the phases of project management. I tried to give a very high level overview, and I did try and snippet a little bit of some detailed things, but overall I hope that this served as a well encompassed and holistic guideline that would just give you an overview of what project management could be and look like. And I hope that also the template, the Excel template that I provide for you, can serve as some sort of a basic framework that you can then start to build off on or fill in yourself or customize as to your own project's needs. And with that, thank you so much.